Robert Spector, an acclaimed international speaker, is acknowledged as the leading authority on Nordstrom. He is the only journalist to have interviewed three of the four Nordstrom generations. The Nordstrom family trusts Robert with their story. His 3+ decades of studying and working with this customer-obsessed company has yielded, under the umbrella of the Nordstrom Way, 4 books. And does he have stories? Some of you are going to be really surprised when you hear some of the ones he will share. His newest book, The Century-Old Startup, The Nordstrom Way of Embracing Change, Challenges, and a Culture of Customer Service, details how Nordstrom has stayed relevant since 1901 because they embrace change and don't fear it. He's also the author of Amazon.com Get Big Fast. He was like the first person to write about this disruptive company. I would give other adjectives. But one of my favorites is his mom and pop store. For those of you who grew up near the butcher, the baker, the produce, the flower shop, this is the story from the heart of America. And he's interviewed store owners across the country and in other parts of the world, like London and Tokyo, and is also based on growing up at the Spector meat market. So Robert's going to share how customer service is really the same. The elements are the same, whether you're Nordstrom, Amazon, the flower shop, or Spector meat market. So please join me in welcoming my very long time and dear friend whom I love, speaker, author, and the Nordstrom whisperer, Robert Spector.
Yay, Robert. Wonderful.
Thank you.
As your president, I have the honor of, I would say, asking questions and then listening. It will be an outline. We have a flexible outline of a conversation. I would just like to give a shout out to another speaker pal of ours, Pam, who read the article this week about Robert in LinkedIn and wanted to join us. So welcome, Pam. So Robert, we hear who you are now. Very impressive author, in-demand speaker, world traveler. Can you please give us a snapshot of how you grew up and became who you now are?
Okay, well, I'll give you the abridged version of a very long story. So I grew up in a town called Perth Amboy, New Jersey, which is across the Raritan Bay from Staten Island. So 29 miles from Times Square. See, I didn't say 30, I said 29. And as it's been referenced, I grew up in a family business. My father and my grandfather and my uncle had a butcher shop in Perth Amboy. As a typical immigrant family business. Everybody worked there. My cousins, my uncle, my grandfather, my sisters, and me. And at the time, I didn't say, "Wow, what a great experience I'm having." I didn't even want to be there. You know, the big market day was Saturday. I wanted to be playing with my friends, not slicing liverwurst or making chopped meat. But and then I eventually became a journalist from high school. I did a lot of different writing. I lived in Greenwich Village in the 70s, so I worked for a company called Fairchild Publications. Their best known publication is Women's Wear Daily. I eventually moved to Seattle in the late 70s, got back to working for Fairchild as a stringer. A stringer, for those who may not be aware, is somebody who's a regular contributor, not a salaried employee. And Seattle was starting to bubble up as a retail hub. And Fairchild had a lot of different publications that covered footwear, home furnishings, etc. So, and I would pitch them stories. So for Home Furnishings Daily, this is in 1990, I said, you know, there's this coffee shop, a chain in Seattle that's selling a lot of espresso machines and coffee grinders. It'd be a great story. So at that time, Starbucks was so small that Howard Schultz himself met me at one of the Starbucks stores, and we talked about his business. I eventually got involved with writing doing a book on Nordstrom, working with a Nordstrom salesman. I did a proposal. Virtually no publisher was interested in this book, because Nordstrom was not really had much of a presence on the East Coast. Now, as I said, I grew up in the New York area, lived in Manhattan. There's no more provincial spot on the planet than the island of Manhattan. It is an island. So if it wasn't, right in Midtown Manhattan, it's somewhere out there in the region. The book became the Nordstrom Way became a bestseller. And I launched me into a speaking career, which was totally unexpected. I grew up as a stutterer. So the fact that I ultimately got the opportunity to talk now around the world has been a tremendous experience. As Susan mentioned, I've written 4 different books on Nordstrom, including this new one. And I did the Amazon book and the mom and pop store book. So like I said, I'm giving you the abridged version. That's it. Now you can start firing questions at me, Patricia, and I'll take it from there.
All right. Well, I want you to tell us, you used to write comedy when you were in Greenwich Village, and we've got lots of speakers and authors here. Tell us about writing comedy.
Well, I was when I was in high school, I was always the guy making wisecracks, with the teachers, occasionally get into some trouble about that. But so I always had a humorous bent, and so I did some stand-up comedy writing. I contributed to the National Lampoon. And Jerry Stiller and Ann Mira at the time had a 5-minute show called Take 5 with Stiller and Mira. So I wrote a few sketches for that. But I found that and even though I enjoyed it, it was I knew guys who were much better at comedy writing than I was. So I eventually went back to my comfort zone of journalism. But along the way, I was a ghostwriter for Dr. Joyce Brothers. I wrote questions for a game show called The Money Maze. And if you go on to YouTube and type in Money Maze, you'll see it's a very bizarre show where couples would compete against each other. The opportunity to go into the maze. One spouse would be up on a perch, the other would be running in the maze. And if you directing them to places where you would hit a button and win prizes. It was quite and as you might have heard, the host of the show was Nick Clooney, who's George Clooney's father. So that's just a little bit of my checkered career.
Well, exactly. And I always find this fascinating, how you became who you are. Now, you say Nordstrom was not a big deal. So what inspired you to say, okay, I'm going to write a book about Nordstrom? You helped make them more famous and international.
Well, I saw, covering them, I saw the customer experience that, we all, have a lot of you have talked about and experienced. And I thought that there was something special there. Now, Nordstrom had been mentioned in different books, like in Search of Excellence and a few others. So I knew I had the story. And it was just a matter of convincing a New York publisher that this was worth publishing. So we eventually got a tiny advance, minuscule advance. And I probably made about $1.75 an hour writing this book. But I knew I had the story, and then I was going to make this a bestseller, and that's a whole other side story. And so Nordstrom was ascending in terms of people being aware of it. And I had the opportunity to interview the then 3rd generation of Nordstroms who were running the company, as well as many executives and many salespeople. The book came out and it became a bestseller, and it changed my life.
Now, how did you sell the Nordstrom leadership on giving you access to so many people?
Well, I had been in Seattle for a while, and I had written a couple of corporate histories of local companies. So I had a reputation for not being a jerk, to being somebody trustworthy, and so they knew eventually somebody was going to write a book about them, and it may as well be somebody local who had a good reputation, and they cooperated with me 100%. I interviewed. There were then four members of the fourth generation who were co-presidents, and I interviewed them collectively as well as separately. And I just knew I had a great story, and it was just a matter of getting it out. And here we are.
All right, good. Well, how has Nordstrom survived and thrived since it was a modest shoe store in 1901?
Well, by constantly embracing change, and whether it would be things that are happening internally or things that are happening in the world. So Nordstrom has survived the Great Depression, recessions, world wars, the changing nature of fashion. So in talking about this new book that I've written, The 100-Year-Old Startup, the inspiration for that book came during COVID, when the stores were closed and the offices were closed. Now, the two brothers who are running the company now, Pete and Eric Nordstrom, every Friday would do a Zoom call with all of the employees and give an update on what's happening, when are we going to open, what's the store going to look like when we do open, et cetera. And they would invariably end those calls with, "We've been in business since 1901. We've survived all the things that I just described. We will survive this." And I said to myself, this is a book. And I went through all of the books that I had written, the books written internally by Nordstrom people, including Bruce Nordstrom's memoir, The Third Generation. I helped Bruce with that book. And I looked for common themes. And I came up with an acronym of FACTS, FACTS: flexibility, agility, communication, transformation, social responsibility, and giving examples of ever since 1901 of those qualities, and made it a nice tight book. And my friend Shep Hyken, writing in Forbes, made it one of the top 10 business books of 2024.
Well, Shep, as I told you, is one of my very best friends. And what did he ask for as a result of your great success with his help?
I'm sorry, what did he ask for?
Yeah, no. I know Shep is a great guy, and he always likes a deal. He negotiates all our mastermind meetings because he likes a good deal. Now,
well, Patricia and Susan, we give blurbs, books for our friends, and then they ask us to go. So, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, right?
I know, certainly. Now, it was mentioned about the tire story, and this is a famous story. So give us the background on that, so we feel superior the next time it comes up at cocktail parties.
Okay. This will be the definitive story of how this happened. So now, when I give my talks, I ask people, if they've heard the tire story. And by the way, that is the number one question that people ask me: is the tire story true? The number two question is, do you get a discount at Nordstrom? Unfortunately, I don't, but I'm still working on that. Excuse me. So in the early 1970s, Nordstrom bought 3 stores in Alaska. They were from a different company called Northern Commercial. And they were kind of like a Sears. So Nordstrom bought the stores, eliminated lots of departments, including the tire department. And one day, this gentleman came in from the Alaska wilderness with a set of tires he had bought in that building, just not from that company, asked for his money back, and a Nordstrom salesperson called up the local tire store. How much are these tires worth? gave him his money back. And they took that tire, hung it up back in the stock room as a symbol of customer service. So, because most people say, how could that possibly be true? It is true. And Pete Nordstrom, one of the two brothers who runs the company now, has a podcast called the Nordy Pod, and he did one called "The Tire Story Is True." And they found the salesperson from the early '70s who took that tire back and did the interview with him. So it is a true story. Now, fast forward to a couple of years ago, a woman ordered, actually from the Glendale store, a woman in Southern California ordered a baby blanket. Somehow, what she got delivered to her house was an automobile tire from a third-party delivery service. How that happened, I don't know. So they said, Nordstrom people said to this customer, please, bring the tire back and we'll, take care of it. So the woman brings the tire back, and one of the salespersons says, "Oh my God, it's another tire story, 50 years later." And so the idea that this tire, all cultures need symbols and they need totems. Excuse me. So the tire represents more than just a tire. It represents an entire philosophy, an entire attitude of the culture.
Well, that's great. And I heard your podcast, or the podcast where you were interviewed by the Nordstrom family. So would you say you have your friends at this point?
I would say professional friends. We don't hang out together, but they've been very nice to me. They've let me peek under the tent and see what's going on. So I've been to employee orientations and recognition meetings, and I really have, and the Nordstrom brothers I really have a sense of the culture. What makes Nordstrom? Now, I want to mention now, back in May, Bruce Nordstrom, the chairman emeritus of the company, the father of the guys who run it now, passed away. And I had been interviewed by the New York Times obituary writer 5 years earlier. That's how these obituaries work, about Bruce. And I said, well, I hope this story does not run for many, many years. Eventually, it did. The next day, and I was quoted in there, the next day, one of the style journalists at the Times called me, and he wants to do a follow-up interview. And he was a typical, I can say that because I used to be a Manhattan sophisticate. And he said, "What's with this nice thing and all that?" I said, "Well, that's one of the Nordstroms are nice." And he was kind of skeptical. I said, "Look, I grew up in New Jersey. I'm as cynical as the next guy, but this is who they are." And I said, "Don't take my word for it. Talk to people they do business with." So they talked to other vendors, including Joseph Abood, they made men's suits and sport coats, and they found out it's true. So in the very first word in that follow-up article was nice. And I said, okay, well, I have succeeded, and I'll just read a couple of sentences from the first lead. Nice, in quotes, tends to be a dirty word in business. The cliche holding that nice guys finish last has seldom seemed more true than in the landscape of contemporary retailing, where business is dominated by corporate consolidation, monopolistic practices, and shareholder returns as the ultimate value. Yet nice, as it turns out, may not altogether be pejorative, at least judging by the career of Bruce Nordstrom. It may even be a key to success. And so, as I mentioned, I had a chance. I got to know Bruce very well. I ghost wrote and helped him with his memoir. He was a good man and a great man, and I dedicated the current book to Bruce. So that's the kind of connection that I have with those guys, and now with his sons.
Good. Well, why don't you share some insights from your latest book, The Century-Old Startup?
Well, as I said, the whole thing is built around how do you survive and thrive over more than a century. And as I mentioned, the book has is an acronym. The things I cover, flexibility, agility, communication, transformation, social responsibility. So it's always been a part of the company's DNA. And I start out with the first example of flexibility. The founder, John W. Nordstrom, a Swedish immigrant who emigrated to the U.S. in 1887, arrived at Ellis Island. The classic immigrant story: arrived at Ellis Island with $25 in his pocket. He could barely speak a word of English, and he eventually worked his way west. He was a day laborer, a coal miner, a logger, a farmer. Then in 1896, gold had been discovered in the Yukon, and he decided to go up there and make his fortune. And he was there for a couple of years, and he finally hit a gold strike and made a claim. But somebody had made a competing claim on the same gold strike. Now, back then, of course, the Yukon is in Canada. Back then, the Canadian Gold Commissioner settled all disputed claims. The Canadian Gold Commissioner was the brother-in-law of the guy who made the competing claim. And so corruption was not an unknown quantity back then. So John W. Nordstrom decided to settle rather than contest it. He made $12,000, which in today's money is about $450,000, went back to Seattle and eventually started up this little shoe store in downtown Seattle. But he was flexible enough not to fight this thing. And so that kind of set the tone. Being agile, COVID, the COVID period was a perfect example of how you had to stay agile. You have to constantly look and keep asking what's next. So then the other part, the C is communication. So I took the example of the two brothers giving their Zoom talk as a form of communication, which is so important. Transformation sums up everything that they do. They're in a constant state of transformation. And finally, social responsibility. It isn't just about the exchange of money for goods and services. It's about your role in the community, whether it's your local community or it's the world community. Talking about how you source your products, how you recycle. On the employee side, it's how do you create a workspace that employees of all stripes feel comfortable working there, and also giving away. I mean, Nordstrom, their roots are in shoes, so they give away in programs 50,000 pairs of shoes a year to needy children, or they're giving top coats for kids who have never had a winter jacket. So again, it's being a good citizen as well as being a good retailer.
Good. Well, we, of course, invited you specifically because of the Nordstrom books and your latest. However, you've written 22. Of your 22 books, the others apart from Nordstrom, what are some of your favorites and why?
Well, as you've heard, I wrote the first book about Amazon.
Yeah.
Which is called Amazon.com, Get Big Fast. Because at the time, excuse me, in late 1998, my literary agent said it'd be great if you came up with another narrative, another company. And I said, well, right now, the only company that interests me is Amazon. And surely there must be something in the works out there. Turns out that there wasn't. I was able to get an interview with Jeff Bezos on another book idea that I had, but I wanted to sneakily get in this thing. So I had an interview with him that lasted about an hour. And I mean, the day that I interviewed him, the value of his stock had risen. Now it seems like a paltry number. The value of his stock that day increased to over $450 million. So he was having a good day. And we had a chance to talk. I told him I was interested in writing a book. turns out they didn't want to cooperate. They said it was too early for a book. I had a contract with HarperCollins, so obviously it was not too early. It was right on time, but they did not cooperate with me. Excuse me. But this was real journalism. I was able to talk to 5 of the first 6 employees, and the 6th person was still working there, so he confirmed things on background. I interviewed former employers, former girlfriends, and I really had the story. It came out in April of 2000, and it also did very, very well. And then, so it came out in April of 2000. In October of 2000, I was speaking in Stockholm, as was Jeff Bezos, on the same program. So I had a chance to catch him before he went on stage. And he said, I read your book. I thought you did a good job. I said, well, thank you. People have asked me what you thought, and now I have an answer. So that book was pure journalism. It was pure digging and getting the story. The Nordstrom book, I've been, obviously that's important to me. But as Susan mentioned, my book, The Mom and Pop Store, was very important to me. And because it took me all these years to realize what I had learned working in the store. And I would start to give stories about working in the market. And my father, he was able to. Most of our customers were Eastern European immigrants. So one of the anomalies of the Spector family, we're Jewish and kept kosher. We did not sell kosher meat. So we didn't need anything that my father sold. But that book came out, and that market influenced 18 family members, either directly or indirectly. And now I'll drop a celebrity name here. So one of the people who worked in the market was my first cousin, Seymour Handler. And years later, he had a daughter named Chelsea Handler. So I'm only the second funniest person in my family, but it wasn't just my story, but I did write a lot about that. But when I would be traveling, I would go to different cities. I ask friends, do you have a really good story, a story that that would be good for this? So I interviewed over almost 50 stores, and when I called mom and pop, it's not literally mom and pop. It's mother and son, father and daughter, same-sex couples. Everybody knows what a mom and pop story is. Because at one time, my publisher said, "Why don't we change it to the independent retailer?" I said, that doesn't quite have the romance that I'm looking for. And so I interviewed people who are a part of the community. Who it wasn't, again, what I've said before, it wasn't just the exchange of money for goods and services. It's connecting to the community. When the internet shopping started to become popular, some people said, well, we're not going to need brick and mortar stores anymore because everybody's going to be shopping online. And I thought that was ridiculous. We're all human beings. We want to be in the marketplace. We want to be in the agora and find out, who got married, who died, who had a baby, whatever. And so those stores will always be important to the community. People said to me, well, during that time, well, there aren't any mom and pop stores. I said, look around. It might be a different immigrant group, but it's the same thing. And so I salute those people, and it was an inspiration from my family to do all this, because we saw that we were a part of the community, and we had the customers and how important these customers were to our survival.
Well, I love that. Wonderful. Well, I know that our audience is chomping at the bit to ask you questions. So I will open it up now for our friends who want to. Janelle Barlow, I knew Janelle, a complaint is a gift would be the first questioner.
Perfect.
Take it away, Janelle, unmute. Unmute, Janelle, please.
Thank you. So Robert, I've heard so many stories about the tire stories. It was nice to get it straight. They're very close. I mean, even the little changes that people have added to this story, it's remarkably close to that original story. So here's my question. Does Nordstrom ever get complaints from its shoppers where they say, you know, this is my first time in the store and I was expecting this spectacular experience and nothing great happened. I went in, it was very transactional. I would imagine that those kinds of complaints come in. So what does Nordstrom do with them? How do you react to that kind of a complaint?
Well, as I always say, Nordstrom is not the perfect company. The perfect company is yet to be created. And I, when I give my talk, I said, there's somebody right now somewhere getting terrible service at Nordstrom. The difference is that the Nordstroms want to know when this happened. So I've had people, come up to me after my talk with a bad Nordstrom story, and I said, "Could you send me an email describing the situation, and I will send it to the Nordstroms." And I've done that several times. They are right on the case, getting a hold of that company because they CC me on the communication. So they want to know. They want to know the good stories, yeah, but they also want to know where they failed, where they let down. And one of the things that when I brought the Nordstrom is that they don't believe their press clippings, because they know that they are far from perfect. But as you aptly said, a complaint is an opportunity. Better that they should complain and you react to it as opposed to not knowing it, just losing a customer. So the whole idea is to make it right. And as you said, it is an opportunity.
Good. Susan Rowan and then Tracy Hooper.
Well, I just want to thank you, Robert. I forced you to do this. And this was so illuminating. And I learned a lot about you that I didn't know. And I think the fact that you shared yourself is really important. Nordstrom, for those of you in the Bay Area who miss the downtown store, come on out to Corte Madera. We still have a store. And I'll meet you for coffee. How's that? But Robert, this was great. It was illuminating. And it seems to me that, is there a fifth generation of Nordstroms coming into the business? That's my question.
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to say that Susan is such a dear friend of mine. We are both great networkers, but we can't remember who.
That's right.
Yeah, because that was about 30 years ago. Anyway, love you, Susan. So no, there is a member of the fifth generation working there, but and the Nordstroms have said this, there probably will not be family leadership in the fifth generation. So they are grooming. I mean, they have groomed people. And, as Pete Nordstrom said to me, we found out that you don't have to have grown up in Nordstrom to have Nordstrom values. So there is one family member who's working as a buyer right now. So the chances are this is going to be the end of that era, and it's been a great run. Dollar for dollar, Nordstrom is one of the great business stories of all time, and we will probably never see its like again.
Yeah, but Robert, I want to share this with my club members and our guests. Somebody called me and said, "I just talked to this great guy. The two of you would really get along. I think you should call him and connect." We both don't remember who it was, but the story is, if someone you like and trust tells you you need to talk to someone, pick up the phone. Because look, 30 years later, we've been friends. So
Right.
Thank you, dear.
Wonderful. Thank you. Tracy Hooper.
Good morning. Thank you, Patricia. Robert, thank you for being here. Two unrelated questions. One is, you said the Nordstrom Way became a bestseller. We'd all love to know that quick story about how that happened. And number two, since many of us have written books, what is your writing process?
Okay, well, I'll start with I'll start with the writing process. So, again, my roots are in journalism, so it's a matter of gathering up everything. Because my biggest fear is somebody says, "Well, you left out such and such. That's the most important part. How could you leave that out?" And so I gather everything together. I've written, as I mentioned, a lot of corporate history. So I'll look at annual reports if it's a public company and get as much information. I get all my interviews and I put it into one humongous Word file. And it could be several 100,000 words. And I print it out. I take it to what used to be Kinko's or FedEx, and I get it double printed on both sides. I go through everything, and I have different color pens, and it's not color coded. I'm not that obsessive, but it makes me happy to look at yellows and greens and blues on white paper. And I start moving things around. If people have said something about the same story, I get that together. And it's kind of like, I have a couple different metaphors. It's kind of like sculpture. You have all this massive stuff, and you start taking things away, and you get the eyes and the nose and everything. So, and then I keep going in, and so I need to be omniscient. I need to know everything that's going on this topic, and eventually it becomes a book. Let's see. Now the first question, how it became a bestseller. Unfortunately, it's not a quick story, but basically for that book. I made a list of everybody I knew who could help me move this book another couple of inches. And so I needed to get really good blurbs, and I was able to contact people that I knew. And, Susan, being the great networker, understands that these aren't people I didn't speak to for 30 years and say, "Hey, could you do me a favor?" And these are people I've cultivated and stayed friends with. And when you reach a certain point in life, I was already in my late 40s. The people who you knew when you were younger are now in positions of influence, and it makes them feel good to help you. It makes them feel good about themselves. So I was able to get great testimonial blurbs. I used to, just one example, I used to work in public relations, and a woman who I worked with was at that time the executive vice president for international public relations for Estee Lauder. So I said, could you get me Leonard Lauder to give me a testimonial blurb? And I got him, and I was able to get a friend of mine was a director of Walmart. I was able to get the CEO of Walmart. So because I had to sell my publisher, who thought this would be maybe sell a couple of books in Seattle, that this was a serious book that would have international appeal. So it was a matter of just doing it, and I was like the Frankenstein monster. I'm moving forward on this thing. You could throw flaming sticks at me, or you could shoot bullets at me. It doesn't matter. I'm moving forward. And it eventually became a bestseller. And as I said before, it changed my life.
Thank you.
Janelle, do you have your hand up for a second time?
Yes, I do. If I see there's no other,
I've got the sun right in my eyes. Can you still see me okay?
Yes, I can.
Good.
Yeah, you look even better this way. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah. So here's my question of when Nordstrom opens a new store, are all of those buildings built specifically for Nordstrom, or do they take other buildings and convert them to a Nordstrom experience? And do they build that whole experience concept into the physical layout of the stores?
Well, they haven't been opening too many what they call full line stores these days. For different reasons. But it's a matter. I'm sorry. Could you ask me the key part of that question again?
Do they build specifically brand new, or do they take existing buildings and convert them to the Nordstrom experience, the Nordstrom Way?
Well, for the most part, they are new stores, new buildings. There are a couple of exceptions, starting at the downtown Seattle flagship store, which originally was the home of a store called Frederick and Nelson, which was the grand dame of Seattle department stores. I wrote their corporate history in 1990. Their 100-year anniversary. They went out of business in 1992, and that's a completely separate story. So they took over that building, and so that was the existing building. And Vancouver, BC, where they had a store, unfortunately they stopped their Canadian operations. That had been an Eaton store, but for the most part, these are brand new stores designed for them. If anybody is going to be in Manhattan anytime soon, I suggest that you go to their store on 57th Street, and which is a spectacular store. It's about 380,000 square feet. I had an opportunity to view the store, get a tour of the store before it opened, and then after it opened, and it's all about creating that experience. One of the fun things about that Manhattan store is in the middle of one of the high-end women's shoe departments is a cocktail bar. So one of the Nordstrom people, so how could we have missed alcohol and shoes? That's the perfect combination. But it's like inviting people into your home. And to me, there's plenty of room. When you're in a Nordstrom store, you're not deluged with lots of racks of clothes. There is room to breathe, to take in what's going on. And of course, they have restaurants. There are three reasons why people stop shopping. They want to sit down, they want to go to the bathroom, and they want to get something to eat. So if you provide all those things, it's a matter of, that's another way of keeping, putting your arms around those customers and making them feel comfortable and wanted.
Wonderful. Well, I'm off to Vegas on Saturday, and I can't wait to go to the Nordstroms there in the fashion mall. I often do, because I like where they have, I like their restaurant. Well, Craig, our guest, Craig Harrison, you talk on customer service, and you seemed very excited about the idea of alcohol and shoes together. Do you have a question for Robert?
I thought Perth Amboy inspired a lyric from Tom Lehrer. That was the week that was the comedian Tom Lehrer. It's not exactly about Nordstrom, but it doesn't pay. I don't want to diminish Perth Amboy, but it was something about what you throw into the bay in San Francisco, they eat for lunch in San Jose, and I thought I read that was a riff, a riff on something said about Perth Amboy, but. I just was so impressed with your family story as the natural predecessor to your journalistic curiosity and your wonderful book line. Wow, 22 books. I can't wait to learn about what else and read what else you've done. So kind of a question and a compliment.
Well, thank you. I have to mention very quickly Perth Amboy's role in the popular culture. So in James Thurber wrote the Secret Life of Walter Mitty.
Yeah.
He lives in Perth Amboy. Thurber, he grew up in Ohio, had this thing about Perth Amboy. So there's this chapter in his book, My Life in Hard Times, where he's trying to think of the name Perth Amboy, and he wakes his father up in the middle of the night. There's this town in New Jersey with two names, and it's kind of a funny story. Now, in American in Paris with Gene Kelly. There's a scene where he's out in Paris in one of the alleys showing his paintings, and a woman comes up to him and starts talking to him in French, and he says, "Don't talk to me in French. I'm from Perth Amboy, New Jersey." And I always tell people that all roads eventually lead back to Perth Amboy. Now, Paul McCartney is married, his third wife, her father was a high school classmate of my sister. So I always say all roads lead back to Perth Amboy, including the long and winding road.
All right. My question, and then I will let you give us your concluding remarks. What's next for you?
What's next? Well, I'm going to be promoting the hell out of this new book. That's one thing, and I have an idea for something completely different. This would be I have an idea for a TV pilot about online dating when you're in your 70s, which is something that I experience. I'm now living with a woman that I met online. I've interviewed a lot of people who have experienced that, and just the different issues that we deal with when we get into this age group. So I've been noodling around with that, and so that's probably my next thing. I mean, as you heard, I've written so many different kinds of things, and I've always figured that if I could learn the form, I could write it. So whether it's humor or game shows, or I've written radio spots or whatever, it's I'm inspired by the challenge.
Wonderful. Well, good. And how would you like to close your program, Robert?
Well, there's the way that I close my most of my presentations, where I give all these different principles or values, and I said, now, but the most important thing is to be nice. There's that nice word. So this is a story that was told to me by a friend of mine about a friend of hers. So this friend of hers was working at a Nordstrom store in Southern California. She had been there for about 5 years. Her life wasn't going the way she had hoped. She had just broken up with her boyfriend. She was a singer on the side. That wasn't going anywhere. Finally, she said to her manager, "I cannot be nice to one more person. My niceness quotient is all used up." So it was toward the end of the day, and her manager said, "Well, if you just wait on this one woman over there, she can be your final Nordstrom customer." So this woman summons up every ounce of niceness she has left in her entire being, and she's getting her clothes from all over the store and calling up other Nordstrom stores to make sure that the merchandise that she wants will be delivered to her home. Finally, the transaction is all complete, and the customer says to this soon-to-be former Nordstrom employee, "I'm going to tell you, you are really nice. This was just a terrific experience." The salesperson, "Thank you, appreciate that." Customer says, "I just have a question for you." "What's that?" Are you involved in a relationship right now?" "No, I'm not." Customer says, "Because I have a brother, and I think you'd be perfect together." So to make the story short, they got married. Not only did she marry this man, but he's a film producer, and they live in a mansion in Beverly Hills. So what's the moral of this story? When you're dealing with all those customers, please always be nice. So that's my final word.
Wow, that is such a wonderful closing story. And I want to tell you, it might interest you, Robert, that our dear friend Susan Rowan, when she talks about me, she says, Patricia Fripp has never said anything bad about anyone in her life. It is her least desirable quality. So, Robert, that was absolutely wonderful. Thank you for honoring us. We will do our very best to promote your book and buy it. Please buy it. So thank you, and round of applause for Robert. Yay. And we will see you next week for our very own member, past president, Tony Woodall. And I'm giving you a heads up. I got the idea of what my column in LinkedIn to promote your program next week, Tony. It's going to be called These Boots Were Made for Walking. All right. So with that, thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful week. I will talk to you from my hotel suite in Las Vegas. All right. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you very much for our guests. See you soon, Craig. Bye.